right, welcome to our first in-person Vocarium reading in almost 2.5 years. The last time we gathered for such an event was in late February 2020, when 500 people crowded into the Harvard Art Museums to hear Ocean Vuong and Natalie Diaz read. And within a matter of weeks, we were dispersed into an absence or an apartness which had in fact always been present, but assumed a dramatic and magnified form. And then within weeks of that lockdown, looking back at spring 2020 now, there were those small and large ways that we as poets, activists, beings, and bodies began to grip down and reawaken, experimenting with means to catalyze crucial new formations within these constraints. Many of us, as our remarkable introducer tonight writes, were resutured to the streets, where we reunited with what Divya Victor cites as our common tangency, and came and continued to come to testify with our bodies. And even via Zoom, that corporate tool we hacked for the sake of our more radical communings, we found ways, as Renee Char, that great resistance fighter, writes, to live in all the rooms. So that even under our physical isolation, which was necessary and life-preserving for our loved ones and communities, and to all those who are watching via YouTube tonight, I want to honor that because it remains crucial for many. Even our solitude was an involvement, what Paul Celan called the solidary with a D, in which we do not purport to put ourselves down in another's chalk, as Solmaz Sharif so vitally critiques, but persist in turning our solitude towards the threshold and dimensions of our fellow beings. Because at its core, that's what poetry is, or can be, a force of meeting. And so yes, we did find ways, and there are no end of ways, and there are still roots in this room. And through this art form we practice, we have a chance to reimagine meeting, maybe even to create what Baraka called a new reality instead of a new movie. When considering the first voices to present in this room after such a long absence, I wanted to invite writers whose work is visionary of such possibilities and also demands the acknowledgement of the absence that is still present, without which, as Sharif writes, I have learned to be. Tonight, the Poetry Room is honored to welcome Solmaz Sharif and Divya Victor, two writers whose work is dedicated to articulating the subtle and overt gates, curbs, bans, borders that continue to constrain presence and to endanger our passage, and in some cases our very existence as beings. Here to introduce our esteemed guest tonight is Andrea Abi-Karam, co-editor of the tremendous anthology We Want It All, and author of the superb book Villainy, written in the wake of the Ghost Ship fire and the Muslim ban, among everything else. Their collection harnesses street protests as a dynamic poetic formation. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you, Christina, for welcoming us and gathering us here tonight at the iconic Woodbury Poetry Room's Vocarium series. When I think of what I look for in a book of poetry or a poet, I think of the works of Solmaz Sharif and Divya Victor. I'm particularly interested in a documentary poetics in which the I and author are implicated, where the I has material stakes in the subject being researched and excavated. Sharif and Victor demonstrate this blurring as they write through the fatal vibrations of our post-9/11 world. So what does this look like on the page and in the social poetry landscape? In Look, Sharif collages her and her family's own fragmented I, or I might say fragged, as in by explosion, narrative with and within language from the Department of Defense Dictionary of Military and Associated Terms. The result is a haunting formal experiment exposing the U.S. military-industrial complex's language of violence, war, and its persistence, in that there really is no after war. She writes, catastrophic event, just destroyed, died of wounds received in action. In Curb, Victor documents the post-9/11 white supremacist violence against South Asian and Muslim communities in the public space of the US, where the interface of street and home and concrete curb between. In poems abundant with fierce lyrics, reportage, immersive soundscapes, rewritten immigration documents, courtroom transcripts, Victor frames this over with literal GPS coordinates, the poet as cartographer of the targeted and systemic attacks that occur against people of color on, near, against the curbs of our neighborhoods. Sharif's latest work, Customs, mounts a critique of borders, U.S. nationalism through loaded scenes overlooking and or conditionally traversing the international airport's customs gate. Too many of us are intimately familiar with the violence of TSA, customs officers, state henchmen of red tape, impressions on travel documents. Sharif offers a multimodal perspective on this process, negotiating with both language and silence in order to get through the gate, while she also waits at the railing for a loved one to make it across. Customs extends its critique to the U.S. nationalism deeply embedded in contemporary poetry and how it functions in service of the state, calling into question the machinic mechanism that whirs beneath contemporary poetry itself, the prize system, institutional racism, and its history of CIA funding. In Customs, Sharif offers an answer to the question of how to mature and evolve one's craft when its language, its patterns, are owned by colonialism and predicated on the constant erasure of mother tongue. She creates and draws attention to her own poetic language with the eternal invitations out to Gwendolyn Brooks and Audre Lorde. When I reach the long poem in Customs, without which, I can't help but recall Sappho, Anne Carson's translation of her fragments with the double brackets, and think of how in the Western world she kick-started the internal lyric eye, and how now, here, Sharif gives us a lyric eye of conditional traversal, passage from east to west, where the double railing into the endless maze of internal checkpoints in a linguistically erotic and perfectly delivered strike. Quote, no crueler word than return, no greater lie. The gates may open, but to return, more gates were built inside, Sharif writes. Once stateside, emphasis on state, what is the fate of the conditional subjectivity? Curb transcribes, rearranges, broadcasts in a durational way the brutal narratives of post-9/11 life that went unnoticed in temporary flash headlines. Victor calls attention to the way reporting spreads or doesn't spread, and the visceral shock that ensues when one does hear the news. She writes, quote, when I read the news of the shooting, these ears rang over the phone lines of the dead. Expanding the role and responsibilities of what the poet does, Victor simultaneously acts as poet, court reporter, composer, news reporter, cartographer, mother, and daughter. I had the gift of working with Victor throughout Curb's editorial process, and together, along with several of Victor's peers, we collectivized the editorial process to what Victor considered a process of unorphaning, a simultaneous rejection of a prescribed lineage, and instead the collaborative creation of a present, chosen lineage or poetry kindred to hold the work. I can't help but recall Sharif's eternal invitations to Gwendolyn Brooks and Audre Lorde in Customs. When thinking about Curb and materially what a collaborative editorial process looks like, I think of the possibility that transpires when chosen peers ask the author for more of themselves, their interior eye pressed up against a multiplicity, while I think many of us know that Victor gave us Curb. On the night last February that Victor was presented with and accepted the 2022 PEN Open Book Award, she said to me after the ceremony, I hope this means that the world is finally ready for more challenging, experimental, demanding work, and that this is just the beginning. Customs opens with a death of what's considered to be other as requisite for entrance at the US border, which is of course always temporary and conditional. Curb catalogs in prose poetic mausoleum the countless lives of who have been lost to white supremacist violence and the grief of their families who survived them. Readers may be tempted to ask, in the aftermath of this violence and loss, where does this leave us? What happens next? As an extension of their respective chosen, unorphaned lineages, Sharif and Victor extend hands radially outward or rather towards emerging writers, in the classroom as professors, in the social poetry realm calling readers' attention to emerging writers they're excited about, and through their ever-sharpening craft as poets as they continue to write, challenge readers, and demand more from poetry itself. Between these two poets, there is no letter arch, curvature, or edge left unsharpened, no truth left unrevealed. Solmaz Sharif is the author of Customs and Look, a finalist for the National Book Award. She is currently an associate professor in creative writing at Arizona State University, where she is inaugurating a Poetry for the People program. Divya Victor is the author of Curb, winner of the PEN America Open Book Award and the Kingsley Tuft Poetry Award, and Kith. She is currently an associate professor of English at Michigan State University. Please join me in welcoming Solmaz Sharif, who will read first, and Divya Victor to Harvard's Woodbury Poetry Room Vocarium series.
Good evening. Good evening. First, there was a sea, and then there was a knot of hair. First, there was a line, and then there was a story. How do the dead wait in this tunnel, this tomb of book and breast, patient? 1. At the consulate, the line for birth certificates is the line for death certificates. Was the child born beyond a boundary? Was the boundary wrought in gunmetal and grain? When they pull her out, the trundle of my pelvis rattles but doesn't give way. In the prattle of the operating theater, she arrives like a slap, backwards, fleeing the face, the palm indigo smarting from flight. Our shared border is a fist unfurling, a red flag. Her, a thing pink found in the maraud, taken as a peel is further and further from the fruit until plum descends to plum, until a sound long and lean turns into a kind of skin. Her, a thing inked, fleeced by charter. Were the parents held by the law? FS 240. Did they love in the same language? DS 1350. They first lift Serosa from Serosa, arouse all the roses, prick each thorn, hum sub rosa, a song known to someone born before you. Ari-do, ari, ari, ari-do, araru. 2. To bleach a tree, we take the dead stem and braid it to a living branch until a hedge thickens, until the braids come undone and the schoolyard dusts black hair red, until at the hospital ward my cries command the clouds to the window. Cumulus, alluvial, lunatic. Each breath quests a gust, counts to 5, makes a list of the names for God. Twin simoons strand us both at this tear, where earth parts from earth, Zameen. Our zikr, our partition, awaking to daylight assembly from one, many, ovum, pluribus, us, strung on suture. a flag drying, saffron and egg white and succulent on a clothesline. Aloe is an organ, saffron is an ovary. Patient's water intact 48 hours later. They sweep the membrane of the water sack. They bring the sky broom to enter my stoop. They bring the blocks of ice, yes, I feel that. Place them against my chest, yes, I feel that. She's ready, yes, I feel that. Unfold the shrouds, yes, I feel that. Staunch the incision, yes, I feel that. And sign here, Ari-do, Ari, Ari, 3. Until I was 11, I slept inside my mother's passport. In that photograph, I wear the face which drank the wet moons, horns and all. I have the eyes of a deer crossing the Pacific. 2 stitches on a single stave, stitch, stitch. This will form a good scar. This will be a ring of roses, a pocket full of passport poses. Do you have proof of identity? She is her mother's child, as I am my mother's child, as she is her mother's child, as she is her mother's, and as I am my mother's child, as she is her mother's child, and as I am her mother's. Ari, ro, ari, 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 ro, araru, ari, 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 ro. Hang the towels, beat the rugs, skim the way, swaddle the archipelagos. We are coming home with the bundled papers. We have fledged ourselves over this line, paper cranes that we are in this bleached sky. This is the plot, as in, we now have a story, as in, I pricked it red where you and I meet on a grid of wet, as in, I have made a notarized copy of all our feathers. Thank you, Andrea, Solmaz, Christina, Mary, everybody. Thank you for offering me the gift of a manifest audience, for breathing with me, for sounding your hearts with mine in this shared metronome, this chorus of metronomes, which are so different from what Andrea mentioned, so different from the fatal vibration. In performances, I'm really returned to the great pleasure of my own ear, which needs you, the listener, to know itself. So thank you for helping me hear my own voice. Since I was 11, several nation states have been trying to flatten me into a stack of paperwork. They've been trying to fix my identity with a staple to the corner of some forms. And some of the earliest memories I have of my family in this country is us sitting around a secondhand table in Glen Burnie, Maryland, writing into immigration forms, and I've come to think of it as the earliest work of collaboration between me and my family members, because we were narrating ourselves into a national history. And this poem formalizes that in some way. It composes acts of disobedience into the very forms one might have had to fill out at that time. And this is called Petitions for an Alien Relative, and it's a rereading and a rewriting of a form I-130, the Petition for an Alien Relative, which is offered to us as a prompt by the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. And it has an epigraph, which tells you a lot about the fears this nation faces every day. Please do not include graphic photos of childbirth or intimate relations as evidence of a relationship or marriage. It really makes me wonder what they've received. I want to write into that archive. Right. Show not tell, tell not show. First petition. It is a Thursday, and no one out on this long street looks like your mother. So you go home, wrap yourself in form I-130, knit a nest with a ballpoint pen, limb your ken inside a placeholder, smooth your limbs into a square to beg for a place for your first space, her. Write a name into the petition in thin, improbable syllables. No one calls her by this name in the elsewhere because they know her fish market haggle, purse tucked at the waist, sari pleats pulsing like flushed gills. No one except the men who will ask her, "Ma'am, can you name 2 national holidays?" and "Ma'am, who lived in America before the Europeans arrived?" So you plan it out. Letter by letter, in letters, your mouth cupped to her cataracts, ma. Just listen and answer the men who ask how she came to know you, if she intends to remain here. And sir, for how long have you known that ma was a bowl made for 2, brimming beyond any border, red as the arrival of her face 7 years later, a paper apparition drawn closer and closer to you by a queue unknotting at a frayed horizon in an airport when it is a Thursday, and suddenly she walks through the passport photograph you once stapled at the edge of a petition to anchor her womb to your migrating heart. Second petition A. Use this form if you are a citizen or lawful permanent resident of the United States who needs to establish your relationship to an eligible relative who wishes to immigrate to the United States. Right here, if you know this place as home, about a beloved whose skin you cannot live without, whose fingers know why the jasmine bushes will not flourish in your backyard in El Sobrante, why your batter sours too late, why no amount of sugar will make your tea sweet, why your front yard is scattered with pinions, why all mail arrives like a bird strike to the fuselage, to the dotterels dawdling and then shredding the turbines, whose letters you fold and unfold and fold and unfold until the creases give way and you put the pieces back together on the dining table to make a map for a country made of vein and sinew with hands pulled clean of wedding bands and raw rice, a map for a country of 2. B. If you need extra space to complete any section of this petition, use the space provided in Part 9. Explain here again why they wish to leave behind the stone well where they first kissed you, where the large terrapin laps the shadow and circles around the mossy rock overhanging the clutch of her eggs to circumnavigate a history of water trapped in land, where ankles graze against cotton skirts stamped again and again and again with laughing doves carved into wooden blocks, where an open suitcase is an undug grave, where a field of sugarcane is a bruise spreading purple through land owned by the IMF, a land free of flags, yet flagging, flagging, flagging. Third petition. I am filing this petition for my, select only one box. I am filing this petition for my spouse, select only one box. I am filing this petition for my parents, select only one box. I am filing this petition during the 3rd shift at the mobile. I am filing a petition for her eyes and her tendency to leave jars open. That'll be $4.50, have a good one. I am filing a petition for her eyes and her tendency to leave jars open, and the way a nape turning away from me. That'll be $17.80, have a good one. I'm filing a petition for her eyes and her tendency to leave jars open, and the way a nape turning away from me is a bride walking towards me, her hands veiled in a vermilion epic written with a crushed branch of henna. Yep, you'll find it right next to the coffee. Yep, have a good one. I am filing a petition for her eyes and her tendency to leave jars open, and the way a nape turning away from me is a bride walking towards me, her hands veiled in a vermilion epic written with a crushed branch of henna its flowers kept aside, each of the 4 sepals pointing in one cardinal direction, the lobes spread thin and patient, each red stamen paired and perched, the petals ovate and leaning across the cliff of night into the gasp of the hungrier hours. During the 3rd shift, you do not see her as I do, between the Haribo gummies and the sour cream ruffles, fluorescent, arms akimbo, sweet burrow, sweetest sparrow. Last petition. Or USCIS Form I-130, Spring Night Pastoral for alien relatives. All of our alien relatives. Ma, remember when we waded into the form field and pulled pussy willow with inky palms, flicked buckeyes into checklist boxes, swung down on drop-down menus like banyan branches, cut terraces into the small print marshes, dragged yoke highlighters through, roved through the footnotes as you roamed through unthreshed paddy, and we, yes, I remember. We parceled our family into placeholders that September and huddled in the warmth of an archive set on fire. In February 2015, Suresh Bhai Patel, then aged 57, was visiting his son's family in Alabama after recently becoming a grandfather. He was there to help care for his son's baby, who was born sooner than the family had anticipated. When he was taking a morning walk on his block, a neighbor had called the police, citing a skinny black guy prowling around the neighborhood. A cop car tracked him down mere yards from his son's home. He was assaulted and thrown to the ground by Madison police officer Eric Parker. The assault left Patel paralyzed. The lawsuit against Parker alleged a number of claims: false arrest, improper search and seizure, use of excessive force. It comes as no surprise that a year later, Parker was acquitted of civil rights charges and reinstated into the Madison police force. Blood soil. Residential neighborhood, Madison, Alabama. I slouch to the writing, sideways. Crab limbs cling to the torso in tumult, where my elbows bowl in, my knees keel to my feet scraping off the carpet, frothing this writing body to my desk. My reluctance is quicksand, this lyric lead. I can't know how each fist knots, each knuckle locks. His legs refuse gravity, coil on pavement. His torso goes limp, Keen's quiet, away from the dash cam. His head, its dread stillness. I said, Mem Kayum, no English, Indian, walking. I said, Mem Kayum, my handkerchief fell. I said, Mem Kayum, I was brought down on the grass. The law says to every action there is always an opposite and equal reaction. Therefore, a handkerchief falls. Therefore, a shoulder blade blench. Therefore, they offer his body to the sky. Therefore, heave it weightless. Therefore, wrap it to the frame, because he is no matter. He is flinch, thin as linen, light on plein air. There is more of him, more where a scald falls, more where chest plows over, more where one body pushes into another, pushes a therefore into asphalt, plows this life of blood and soil. Therefore, they hold it. Here, a land dry as swatches of bone. Here, drowned sound of flesh on the ground. Hold it. Here, land of more. Hey, buddy, where do you live? Where are you going? Hey, buddy. Where do you live? Where are you going? Hey, buddy. A yard is a measure, a curb its end. This is how a landscape renders a portrait as long and as wide as hemmed-in history of linen. Was it white, like the ones my father threw in the wash, soggy from a day at the plant, or checkered, like the cotton ones he picked for Sunday mass, or embroidered, like the one in custody at the museum? A silk square with Krishna flanked by gopis, holding lilies, blood-tipped, bone-white, and buttered. Its edges worn from worry or waiting? Or was it a measure of cotton slung around necks by thugs to make a noose from a slung loop of a rumal, a coin anointed for Kali lashed to one end, and a life dwindling at another, to wrangle a traveler, then strangle that stranger? You want to stand up? No? You okay? You want to stand up? No? You understand English? No? The law says the mutual actions of two bodies upon each other are always equal and directed to contrary parts. But his body was one of two that couldn't speak of its place. Therefore, they swept leg under leg, therefore made him look at the land, made him taste the verge between walk and veer. The law says, if you press a stone with your finger, the finger is also pressed by the stone. Therefore, with these fingers, I will knot a garland of buds plucked from the camphor weed, flailing on the curb where, cuffed by the soft folds of his neck, his spine snapped and swelled, and therefore we will wear its scratchy rope for another century of that stony sleep until our sunder feels more like survival. And I'll close with one poem. I opened with a poem about the birth of our child in Singapore and the mystery of her being born an American citizen elsewhere to someone who feels Indian. And this moves us forward several years after, across a mahogany dining table. On one end, my daughter, who was then 3 years old. On the other, her great-grandmother, my grandmother, who was 82 years old. And they're singing a very popular song. You might have heard of it. It's called the ABCD song. It's a real hit in our house. And I recognize that the way my daughter pronounces the H is different from how my grandmother pronounces the H, which is like me. My daughter says H, and we say H. And I wondered what kind of an inheritance that pronunciation is and what kind of debt she will owe, because it is different from how I say it, how my grandmother says it. So this is locution, location. She sings the letters to her great-granddaughter, strings them, marigolds, into garlands in the order of the alphabet, E, F, G. She tugs the H, taut and long, far from the breast, a letter the length of a coast, the width of a gull's caw. She now carries the H like I will carry the gurney later, weightless hammer of feather. The letters swim with the orange petals around and around her, child and crone, milk flesh home, mouthly, smelling of talc and gooseberry. When that song sills, will we bury her in the sky? Cirrus flight folded into the pleats, riding the crest and trench of her saris, weave and weft, will we be left with her H? A patch of ash, just voiceless and glottal, an open casket fricative, an open hatch? H, listen, I am asking you for her tongue wrapped in twill, flung to its thatched edge. I am asking for a body so far, thrown so far, it meets itself in the mouth. How do we bury her H? One glyph on either side, arm in arm, harm in harm. How will we use this twin-ruddered throat in an open boat home? H circles her T, water sunk by cream. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. H floats my grandmother's child body, breastless, buoying, ankles cuffed in silver, scales sequined on its heels so it can stay and stray and swim with her when she is restless, sugar-hungry, when she is 80 and 220, heavy, human, cane in fist, knife in hand, in the kitchen thrumming, H, 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 the percussive hinder, the fescues of coriander thunder, H, H, H turns the lathe with each exhale, H, 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 her belly wet with sink and soap, its damp equatorial girth curls my mother into her mother, hatchet to hammock, split and swung, H, the waist in two, H, the lips in four, H, a longitude's wretch. I chart this stretch of tongue, I listen for how her breath measures the distance, pulls skin apart to etch the gravity of gravidity. My daughter pouts yogurt out, plums the berry, sun-smitten, filmed in milk, wades her phonemic fen, hailing her elder with bib and mitt. But when this song sills, where shall we dig? Us grandmotherless fools, us rudderless, us letter poor, with drum and dread, where shall we dig? H, 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 for this shibboleth of breath. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Solmaz, Divya, and Andrea, and for all of you for helping us actualize this first in-person gathering. I don't even know what the word in-person means. What other way is there? Please come up and meet, unmute your personal mic and come and meet the poets. And there are books for sale, but if you can't buy a book or you choose not to, please don't let that inhibit you from just greeting the poets who are here to meet you. And please also say hello to a stranger in the room, because we can. Thank you so much. And next week, join us for Victoria Chang and Lainey Brown. So